This conversation with Billy Mills was taped before a live audience on the campus of Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Olympic gold medalist, author, and businessman Billy Mills was interviewed by Levi Rickert of Native News Online on Tuesday, November 15th, 2022.
Welcome to Michigan, the land of the three fires, the Potawatomi, Ojibwa, and Odawa. Notice I said Potawatomi first. I happen to be Potawatomi, so I threw that in there first. But welcome to Michigan, and we're so happy to have you here tonight. At Western Michigan University, this is Native American Heritage Month, and the folks here at Western are celebrating Native Americans, and I like to tell everybody we like to celebrate who we are year-round, but here we are tonight.
I'm humbled to be here. Over the years, I've ran against people from this university, and special to see the athletes here that have a unity through diversity cause kind of on a global basis, but thrilled to be with you.
And Billy, the film was phenomenal. Your win was fantastic. I was telling Nedra Darling, and Nedra is a mutual friend of ours, and she used to be the chief spokesperson for the Department of the Interior, Indian Affairs, that you were coming to Michigan. And I was talking to her about 6 or 8 weeks ago, and she said that when she was a little girl, the Olympics was on in 1964, her mother said, "Go, Indian boy, go, Indian boy." You can laugh at that, folks. It's funny. I mean, you're an Indian boy that grew up. You were born on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. Can you talk to us about growing up on Pine Ridge?
Well, first, I was thrilled in a sense to identify how I got to Pine Ridge. My great-grandmother rode in with Crazy Horses Band and her 5 children. One of them was my grandfather, Ben Mills. So just the fact that my great-grandmother could ride in with one of my all-time heroes, Crazy Horse, when he was bringing his band in to surrender. Then he was killed. He was murdered. So they placed many of the people from his band with the Red Cloud Band. So I became part of my grandfather became part of the Red Cloud Band, and that's how I happened to be from the Oglala Lakota tribal nation.
Yes. And tragically, your parents died when you were young. And how old were you when your mother passed away?
I was 8 years old, just a few months from being 9, and I was broken. My dad just simply hugged me, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "Son, you have broken wings, but it takes a dream to heal broken wings."
Wow. And then, tragically, your father passed away 3 or 4 years later when you were 12. So tell us about that, and how did he die?
When my father told me I had broken wings, it takes a dream to heal broken wings, he would tell me to find a passion in life, develop the skills to equal the passion, bring them together, and magic is created. Create the magic, son. So my father helped me heal from the death of my mother, but he would always talk to me about finding a passion. And probably half a dozen times, he'd have his strokes. And they were always middle of the night. Might be a winter night snowing or a hot summer night. And we'd always make it to the hospital walking. This particular day, it was the afternoon. And he said, "Son, we need to go to the hospital. I need a ride this time." I begged some adults to take my father to the hospital. They didn't have the time. I'm crying, saying, "Daddy, I can't find you a ride." And he said, "That's okay, son. We made it before walking. We'll walk again." So I'm trying to carry him on my shoulder when the car pulled up. I got him in the back, the 2 adults, none of them helping me put my father in the car. My sister just came back from town, and my father's last words were, "Son, everything's going to turn out just fine." He would tell me to create the magic. One or two of the magical things you do might turn into a miracle. Everything's going to turn out just fine, son. Create the magic.
So you lost both parents. You were an orphan.
12 years old.
Who raised you? Who raised you at that point? Where did you go live?
I was raised by two Lakota women. My oldest sister, Ramona, 16 years old. The eldest sister, Margie, 18 years old. They themselves were seeking their own rites of passage into womanhood. We had an older brother, as out of the Navy, but he was kind of the overseer. They dealt with my brother, but I was raised by two Lakota women.
Now, I understand you ended up going to boarding school, Indian boarding school. Now, let me say this before you answer. Since May of 2021, when 215 graves, unmarked graves, were identified at the Kamloops residential school up in British Columbia, there's been high interest in Indian boarding schools. Tell us about your experience at Indian boarding schools.
When I went to Haskell Indian School, there was a high school then and a post-grad. I met a man, Tony Coffin, Potawatomi Indian.
A Potawatomi.
Potawatomi.
Wow.
The head of all the sports events. And I was the second smallest. And he talked to all of the young men, all the young boys. And he said, "I'm not just talking about you undefeated football players. One of you just may do something incredible." That's my dad saying, "Create the magic." And he said, "One of you two little ones just might be one of you." And he pointed at us. And I took that in. I wanted to do something. Tried football and it hurt. Tried basketball, I wasn't very good. But I loved to run.
So this coach became a very much of an influence in your life.
The coach became my mentor. He asked me to quit football and run cross country. We'll have a cross country team. I told him I wanted to play football. I heard him tell my brother and a few of the older football players, rough him up a little, but don't hurt him. They roughed me up. At the end of practice, I go to coach and I said, do you still need me for cross country? He said, "I've been praying you'd come back." And that changed my life. My third race in cross country, I won. Then I was undefeated the rest of my cross country career. And first or second in the mile. Not fast times, but I came out of high school number 4 in the nation in the mile. Not everybody ran the 2 mile, but the top 50, maybe the top 100 milers would run the 2 mile just to see how they could do. So I came out of high school with the second fastest 2 mile. And I knew I loved to run. I knew that I found a passion. And my dad would say, "Find the passion, develop the skills, bring them together. Boom, magic is created." So I set on a dream to try to create some magic.
Mm-hmm. So even though your father had passed away, his memory and things that he told you.
His memory stayed with me in the most powerful way. It helped me. I wasn't ready for the racism that I would face. And I was quiet. I was reserved. The third time I made All-American and was asked to get out of the photo, I broke. I told some of the younger students, I know what it is to be broken. But I stayed in the photo. I never saw a photo without me, but they wanted me out of the photo. I go back to my hotel room, and the 4th floor, it was actually the AEU National Championships, my junior year. And I didn't want to kill myself, but I was going to jump. I just wanted to go where it would be quiet. I heard unspoken words through energy. My body, that sounded like my dad's voice, "Don't." Then quietly, almost sacredly, "Don't." I got off the chair crying, and I wrote down a dream. Gold medal, Olympic 10,000 meter run. The Creator has given me the ability. The rest is up to me. Believe, believe, believe. Went back to the University of Kansas to try to get my life together. And I saw this beautiful co-ed walk by me. I followed her. Couldn't be called stalking her, but I stuck close to her. A year later, we were married. And that's been coming up on 61 years.
Well, I think part of the story you left out, she was a switchboard operator.
Okay. We recruited an athlete to go to the University of Kansas, a half-miler, and it was from Coffeyville, Kansas. So I'm calling for a date. The lady I was dating went home for the weekend. I kept getting this same switchboard operator. And she said, "You're having a hard time finding a date." I said, "Yeah, how about you?" And she said, I don't accept blind dates. I said, we got to recruit this athlete from Coffeyville Junior College. She said, "I went to Coffeyville Junior College." "Well, maybe he knows you." She said, "Well, I'll meet you at the student union. We'll have a Coca-Cola. If I like you, I'll go. I'd like to see who he's dating." So we met. We pulled up in front of the hotel. I borrowed a car. He walks out and he said, "I can't find my date." I said, "Well, get in. We'll have a good time." He looks and says, "Pat, what are you doing here? I've been trying to call you." So I quickly said, "Well, she's my date." So it turned into be his date. I sat there and they had a great time and danced and we had some sandwiches. He came to Kansas and they had a couple dates. But I would show up at that time to take her. He had a car. I was going to have her walk 3.5, 4 miles round trip to the theater with me. Cold winter nights. The third time I showed up, Patricia said, "Why don't you just join us?" So I jumped in his car with them and we go to the movie. He's on the left, I'm on the right. When the movie's over, he said, "You know, Pat and I are just good friends. There's something special with you two. Why don't you guys just admit it?" And from that point on, that was a year we were married. And,
Well, I was just going to say, it's always nice to know the person you're interested in, other people are interested too. So you've been married how many years?
this January 27th, it'll be 61 years.
And his beautiful bride is in the room tonight. Pat, would you stand up for us?
Okay, picture.
And in preparation for tonight, Bill and I have had several conversations, and the question that I would always ask, and I've asked Pat this question about the racism thing. You know, the idea she dated you, you were Lakota, but tell us that part of the story.
Well, there's several ways. The systemic racism could be very innocent, but it could be hard. One of her aunties said, "Well, what do you plan to do now that you're marrying my niece?" I said, "Well, finish my college, one more semester, become an officer in the Marine Corps, make the Olympic team, and try to win a medal." She laughed and said, "You just don't become a Marine Corps officer." I said, "I know that, but I have a plan. You just don't make the Olympic team." "I know that, but I have a plan." "And you just don't win medals." I said, "Well, that's my dream." And she laughed and walked away. But my family some of my family took Pat aside and said, "What are your plans with our brother?" But mainly, the real racism that surfaced. I'm a young lieutenant, married, one child, going to Camp Pendleton to join the elite Marine Corps track team that was chosen. I was the last athlete they chose. 5 hotels in Arizona, New Mexico. We went to 5 hotels to find a place to sleep. I'd walk in, they'd turn the sign from vacancy to no vacancy. We just sold the last room. After the 5th hotel, I simply said, "Pat, you go and get a room." She walked in very innocently saying they had lots of rooms. We went back to the first hotel, but it was always there. 95 death threats in my life, been called prairie, the N-word, been spit upon. It's just gives you the strength to stay the course. We want to bring people together. We want this incredible democratic experiment to work. And we've dedicated our life to trying to bring people together.
Mm-hmm. Well, racism is we know is a very evil thing, and it's very prevalent. Are you telling us that on the Great Plains, Native Americans face a lot of racism?
Well, you know, America has in so many ways, And I don't know what your thoughts are with me, but I'd love to be able to share just my work with the doctrine of discovery.
Well, go ahead and talk
Okay.
about it.
I set on my own course to find out why half of me was accepted, the other half was not. Half white, half Lakota. After I came back from the games, Billy, we'd love to let you join our prestigious business club. You'll meet the movers and shakers, it'll enhance your income. Besides, Billy, we understand you already half qualify, you're half white. So I set on a course to find out why is half of me is rejected, the other half's accepted. So I would encourage everybody, if you want to bring America together, read The Doctrine of Discovery, condensed, courtesy of the Vatican, influenced by the kings and queens of Europe. The Pope wrote, 1493, The Doctrine of Discovery. Any lands found in the New World can only belong to the first Christian monarch. I'm a Christian. So it's not an attack on Christianity or the teachings of Jesus, our Jesus. Any new lands found can only belong to the first Christian monarch that discovers them. The inhabitants must come under international rule of law. Their laws, their religion, the sounds, the sacredness of their drum will no longer apply, and they must submit to Christianity. But then within a generation, if we submitted to Christianity, we could own land. That's that dark period of history where we had no souls. The Western movement began. Land had to be developed, slavery. No words can describe the inhumane treatment of the innocent. When the slaves were freed, leadership in Washington went to the poor white. Maybe some of my white relatives, I've never met one, but I'd love to. Don't let them take your jobs. They developed great skills as slaves. Jim Crow's born. 1 year before I won a gold medal, the Civil Rights Act was signed. It was a month before it was signed into law. I went to Dr. Martin Luther King's church. I wanted to stand where those 4 young girls stood, putting on their robes to sing in the choir, maybe celebrating their newfound freedom, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Boom, the bomb goes off and they're killed. I sat there in the pew, and I stood there, and I cried. Why? Why? That was counteracted with the war on drugs to make hippies and young black men felons. They dropped hippies, included Native American men. Now they're including poor white. The war on drugs has been devastating. Patricia and I went to 3 reservations right before the pandemic where 40% of the young girls, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, have to find a different place to sleep every night for fear of being molested by people high on meth. So the footprints, the doctrine of discovery, treaty signed, treaties broken, slavery gave birth to manifest destiny. Jim Crow, the war on drugs, those are etched into every fiber of our social way of life. Our educational system, our political system, our entrepreneurial system, forever dictating the rule of law. As I close this, it created 2 things. Generational trauma, which created generational poverty, which created a poverty of dreams, gangs, etc. But it also created generational privilege. Now, being half white, I've been offered generational privilege. I've always tried to choose to stand with the Lakota woman that had no voice, but just being half white. It's innocent, but it's there. So, Patricia and I have dedicated our life trying to get people to understand what made the footprints of this incredible democracy and bring us together. They both have their patriots. John Lewis is one of my patriots, generational emotion, generational, the poverty that was created. I have many quality human beings that are quality leaders that are generational privilege. Some of them are recognizing it, others are not. So to close that, they've got to come together. When I was in college, studied Tocqueville, the Greek philosopher or scholar, the French scholar, that said, America can never be defeated from without, but America can be defeated from within. It depends upon how they handle the descendants of the slave and the descendants of the indigenous people whose lands they took. So I say, is it inclusion or exclusion? We're at that point where we have to decide. And I just believe so strongly in the youth of America. I believe so strongly in this incredible democratic experiment that I choose democracy.
And I think Americans chose democracy in the last election.
That was some beautiful news when I saw that finally we were voting more as a country. The world where Pat and I have traveled, 8 of the last 12 countries we've gone to, they're looking toward the women from the United States of America, Native American women, African women, women of color, all women, for hope, for direction, for confidence. They're saying what happens to the women in the United States of America is either their celebration or their demise. So I believe in our women. My granddaughter taught me that women hold up half the sky.
That's beautiful. Speaking of Native women, what do you think about Secretary Deb Haaland?
Oh my gosh. She's a gift. She's brilliant. She has the resilience, and she's brilliant. And she alone has taken the initiative to address the land issues that will make America better, that will fulfill some of our dreams of our culture, our traditions, our spirituality, living on for generations to come. She's a gift. She's a gift to America.
For those of you who do not know, Deb Haaland is the first Native American ever to serve in a presidential cabinet in a secretarial role, and she's the Laguna Pueblo, and we are very proud of her. She established the boarding school initiative, and you actually, when we talked earlier, some of your experiences were very positive at the boarding school, but we also know that that's not real consistent with what happened.
When I was growing up, and it was always the full blood that got the brutality. The little guys living on the 3rd floor of the dormitory, they'd have to go down 3 floors to the bathroom at night. 5, 6, 7 years of age. Some of them would take thread and wrap it around themselves so they would know that they're getting ready to urinate, but they have to, rather than wet the bed. Brutality. I've seen friends of mine having their mouth washed out with soap simply because they spoke one of their tribal languages. I would not have let them take a photo of me at Carlisle when I stood there at the graves of the children, because my tribe, the Lakota Oglalas, were the first to be taken to Carlisle, and they asked for one promise: don't cut their hair. It's the sacredness of having the long hair, the braid. Don't cut their hair. And they could hear the screams of the young men being helped on while their hair was being cut before the wagons got off campus. I've known friends of mine that would just be hit in the face because they either didn't hear or didn't understand. The brutality is there. I know women that have come to me from years, from being sexually abused at a school, or being beaten, and living with it for 25 years before they had the strength to adjust to it. Mm-hmm. So, Secretary Interior, she took the initiative to start finding out who's been abused at the boarding schools. The crimes were committed. Other countries are studying the doctrine of discovery. They're studying why is America not addressing these issues. They're asking Pat and I as we travel. It's painful.
What do you tell them?
Well,
why don't you think the United States is addressing some of these?
Well, the last time this occurred, and the runners here might enjoy this, Mohamed Gamoudi was being honored, winning his gold medal in Mexico City, finishing second to me. After he told me how to get faster, he chose Pat and I to be there when he's being honored. I spoke, Muhammad spoke. We spoke of unity through diversity, a man who's taken Native American virtues and values and is a Christian, to this man of Islamic faith. As we walk off the stage, this professor follows me and says, how can I be truthful to the United States of America that I believe in their democracy? How can I be truthful by teaching the truth of the abuse of the indigenous nations? My only answer was, the truth should never be too extreme to discuss. If our country becomes too extreme to discuss the truth, there comes the demise of our democracy. And I say that today. The truth should never be too extreme to be taught. It can strengthen us. America needs our youth. America needs our diversity to truly mature to that incredible sacredness of our flag, but all of our laws do not represent. And I'll just continue talking about diversity through unity till the day I die.
That's wonderful.
I believe, and the runners there with your cause, unity through diversity on a global basis. Very few sports can teach unity through diversity on a global basis like running. So I salute you guys.
That's wonderful. Hey, I want to switch back to you running. At what age did you realize you were fast?
On the steam, Billy Mills is really putting it on. Billy Mills has the lead for the United States, heading toward the finish line. Billy Mills.
I was the slowest through grade school, but everything was sprints. I tried boxing and it hurt, but I upset the boxers. My record in boxing is 0 wins and 6 losses. The heavyweights, and even the lighter weight guys, would get upset if I beat them on the 5-mile run. So I started realizing I can run. I'd get under the fence, up in the grass, and I'd run past them. I'd get a half mile, 3/4 of a mile ahead of them in a 5-mile run, then I'd get back on the blacktop and finish. And then I would get out of there because they would get upset because I was beating them. But I got to thinking, hey, I'm fast for long distance.
Well, tell us about your road to the 1964 Olympics in Tokyo. When did it really start? You said you wrote that down when you had those thoughts. Don't jump, and you wrote that down that you were going to win the gold. How old were you? And tell us about the road to Tokyo.
I think it was September 23rd, 1963, when I was diagnosed as hypoglycemic. Before then, the media would say low self-esteem, orphaned, minority, poverty. You have to learn how to deal with those issues, because at the end of a race, whether it was a slow pace or a fast, like world record type pace, I could go with the leaders, but I was always being out-kicked. And that's when I first found out that I was hypoglycemic, going low blood sugar. My high school coach would give me honey. I'd sip on honey before races. My college coach took my honey jar away, said, we do things different. This is college. So I'd eat 4 hours before. If you're hypoglycemic, you need 2.5 hours at least. So I ran every race in college going low blood sugar. What I didn't know, but found out later, I'm one of those very few, small percentage, usually happens to women, 40s and 50s, that have a tumor on their pancreas. So I've lived with a tumor on my pancreas that spews extra insulin, takes me up and it drops me. That's why I have orange juice here. So if I start dropping, you get confused, you can't see. I took no fluids in the Olympic marathon. 4 miles, 23 miles, fourth. By 24 miles, I blocked out. Woke up, 600 yards to go, where am I? Oh my God, I'm in the Olympic marathon. I must be in last place. I've got to finish. And like 1,000 people go by me. Now I know I'm in last place. I finished 14th. So with those like a mile and a half when I blacked out, I dropped maybe I was still in 4th to 14th. So all I had to do was to take my glucose, and I tell people I should have finished 3rd. I should have had maybe 15 world records. My wife just looks at me and says, "You're 84 and a half," or she says, "You're 6 years from 90, just let it go." But I knew I was fast at an early age, but I just could not understand what's happening to me physically. You know. And she beat me in a 50-yard dash, and that's, I tell her, what I suffered from my worst case of hypoglycemia.
Did you let her win?
She was fast.
She was fast. Great.
She legitimately beat me in a 50-yard dash.
Well, tell us about the shoes. You told me a story about
Oh, my
shoes when
gosh.
you got to Tokyo.
I'd never owned a pair of shoes of my own until the night before the Olympic 10,000. Went to the Bureau of Indian Affairs shoes. I wore government shoes. I wore the University of Kansas shoes. I wore the Marine Corps shoes. Adidas was an Olympic sponsor. Now I can get my own pair of shoes, the first pair I'll own. I'm walking to get my shoes. No reporter talked to me. A reporter stopped me and said, he is from Mumbai, but Bombay at the time, India. "I want to interview you." He said, we call you Red Indian. So I said, "Well, we call you East Indian." He said, "How do you plan to do? Jim Thorpe won 2 gold medals. How do you plan to do?" Now, this is a reporter. I said, "I'm going to win, but don't tell anybody." This is the day before the race. He said, "I'm a reporter." I said, "I know, but don't tell anybody." He said, "I'll tell you what, I'll bring the Indian team by. If you tell them you're going to win, I'm going to do an article on you. It's going to talk with this discussion. It'll be out a day after you win the gold medal if you win." Or he said, "I'll do it, or it'll come out if you drop out." So I said, "Okay." So he interviewed me. Now I go to get my shoes. I walk in. The U.S. Adidas U.S. representative said, "But you have a popular foot size. We have just enough shoes left for the potential medal winners." So I leaned in. Clark is in there trying on shoes. Ron Clark, the world record holder. I leaned in. I said, "But I'm going to win." And he chose a choice word I won't repeat. He said, "You're not going to win," and put his arm around me to escort me out. So I go back in. I said, but I'm going to win. I need shoes. I'm on the U.S. team." He said, "Listen, you have a popular foot size. We're low on your size." He escorted me out. Dick Banks, who worked for Adidas and was the commentator, worked for ABC, he followed me out and said, "I'll get you a pair of shoes." I said, "I don't accept charity. I go to Puma." Now, those 2 guys are brothers. The only time they would talk was when they were suing one another. I said, "I need a pair of shoes for the 10,000. He said, "Adidas has given you shoes." I said, "They refused." And he said, that's Adidas. He said, how do you plan to do it? I've not heard of you, but you're on the U.S. team. I said, "Well, I plan to win." And I don't know why I was saying these things. And he simply said, "Do you really think you're going to win?" "Yes." "Give him a pair." Then I said, "Oh my God, I need a brand new pair of flats for when I'm on the victory stand." He said, "Give him a pair." Then I said, "I'm in the marathon, a BB Bakila, the type of shoe you made for a BB Bakila. I need a pair of those." He said, "Don't push your luck." And he escorted me out. I go back to motel room, like a half a dozen pairs of shoes. Otto Dassler, the owner of Adidas, came and apologized. And I said, "But I have shoes already." He said, "Just give them away if you don't want them. But I live up to my commitments." And the owner left. So I take a Puma, I take Adidas. I had Jerry Lindgren, and Jerry doesn't remember this. He weighed them. I had my eyes closed, and he put them in my hands. "This is the lightest." It was Adidas. Mixed them up. "This is the lightest." It was Adidas. So I wore Adidas. When I promised Puma, I would wear Puma. I won the race. So when I got on the victory stand, I put on Puma.
That's an incredible
I'm trying to be
story.
diplomatic. You know?
Hey, now this Dick Bank, he was the announcer, as you mentioned, for NBC, and he wasn't the main announcer, but he was kind of the sidekick.
Yes.
And he spotted you running fast, and he said,
Look at Mills! Look at Mills! Coming on! Mills is coming on! It might be Bill Mills! What a tremendous surprise here! Bill Mills of the United States!
he ended up getting fired for blurting that out.
Yes.
Why do you think he got fired?
Well, in very conservative days, Dick lost composure. He said the main announcer, Bud Palmer, who was the main announcer, was missing what was developing with me coming up on Clark and Gammoudi. So he broke in, just started screaming, look at Mills, look at Mills, look at Mills. And he goes hysterical, and I win. So they fired him for showing partiality toward an American and losing composure over the air. And it happened out at dinner. Dick told me, the head of sports for ABC, called him over at the dinner table and said, I've got bad news for you. Losing composure over the air, showing partiality, that we don't do that in reporting or announcing. You're fired. So Dick Banks said he stood there, and they said, so you've got a question? He said, yeah. What's the bad news? So he was happy that he expressed his emotions, and in many ways he made the race.
Yeah.
But he did that online before he died. He wanted to set the story straight about him losing composure over the air. But he also took me, I was making my own orthotics, so he took me to a podiatrist to get orthotics. So for some reason, I think Dick Banks' folks might have owned a lot of the land, or leased it from the tribe in Palm Springs.
Oh, really?
So he's involved in real estate, so he had understood the Native America.
Yeah. Well, that's an incredible story, and you went in the Olympics. And one thing I have noticed, and I guess as I was thinking about it as I got prepared to interview you, Billy, it strikes me in America, we have athletes, we have rock stars, we have movie stars, TV stars. They come and go, flash in the pan, as they say. You have remained relevant 58 years after winning the gold medal, and you're still a hero across Indian country. I go to conferences, I see you there, and you are so well thought of. You are a legend. Why do you think you had that staying power?
I think it's because of what I chose to do. I felt my victory was a gift, and I wanted to give back. And the elders would say, Billy, in our culture, you achieve something, you have to give back to those who helped you achieve. It's simply called a giveaway. So the elders would ask me, when are you going to have your giveaway? And I didn't know how to do a traditional giveaway. Patricia said, take the traditional thought and do it in a contemporary manner. So we start giving back with a movie. That was our giveaway. And we would get women, Muslim women, contacting us saying, do you think my dream can come true? And delicately I would respond back. Other countries started inviting Pat and I. We were in the Maldives, and I spoke, and this lady came up. An Olympic friend of mine had me speak to his community. And I knew she was emotional, and I was emotional. And I was not going to hug her, which we would do here in the States, so I stand there with my hands. She put her hands on my hands and said, we need more stories like this. Our world is changing too fast. I said, are you a school teacher? She said, I was. What do you do now? I'm head of education for the country. I had no idea the people I was talking to. Then this young girl came up and said, do you think my dream can come true? And her eyes were sparkling. I said, if your dream is what I see in your eyes, your dream could come true. We parted. 6 months later, we're in London, Mohammed Gammoudi, his wife, his daughter, Pat and I, and our eldest daughter. And I speak to the Maldives Olympic team. And this beautiful young girl came up. I looked at her, and she said, can I have a hug? So I looked at Dr. Hussein Halim, my Olympic colleague, and I said, what do I do? He said, hug her. So we hugged, And I parted and I said, were you the young girl who asked me? She said, yes, yes. Before I could complete the sentence, my dream was to make the Olympic team. So we hugged again. And it's just been it's been a blessing, the Lakota culture. Other people are studying it. Other people are studying what I just described about the doctrine of discovery. So we have contact and friends in like 180 countries. So I think it's the fact that I did not become an Olympic gold medalist. I became a person who took from the games global unity through the dignity, character, beauty of global diversity. I took a Lakota prayer, we're all related, and tied that into global diversity. And the final thought, that the unwritten theme of the Tokyo Olympics by the youth, born the day we dropped the first and second atomic bomb, and maybe born the day of the Olympics. Their unwritten theme was to see the world as one. And Pat and I have just chosen to work on diversity, to bring people together. I spend so much time just praying for the words that could help me unite. What we've done in finishing this question, we've sat down with other people. I've taken our Lakota virtues and values and sat down with people of other societies. We've compared virtues and values. We found common ground. We could bond. And from that bonding, we could discuss our differences on an intellectual level and hope to unite. So many, and I say this just for information, so many of my Christian friends won't talk to somebody on a global basis who is of Islamic faith. Or they won't talk to a person taught art on the art ship, taught art on the Crystal Cruise Line. And some of my friends, athletes, Christian, would spend all their time trying to convert this 85-year-old Jewish man and leaving, destroying somebody's incredible vacation. So I just try to unite. And I found activists throughout the world fight for social justice. Many of my Christian friends convert to save. And I just say, I'd leave it up to Jesus Christ, not me. Final comment, I spoke at one of our universities, Pepperdine University. They said, we understand you have a book out. Send us copies, we'll give it to the Board of Regents. Send them copies. They wrote back and said, you're not a Christian, we're canceling your presentation. And I said, it's interesting how people tell me I'm not a Christian. Why are you saying that? Well, nowhere in your book, Lessons of a Lakota, do you mention Jesus Christ. I said, I didn't write a book about Jesus Christ. I wrote a book about spirituality. And they said, if you will admit to us that you are a Christian, we will not cancel the presentation. All I could think of was, I will leave it up to Jesus Christ to determine whether I'm saved or not. I'll not leave it up to the Board of Regents at your university. So they canceled. So I think just trying to get involved on a global basis, local basis, on diversity, bringing people together.
Well, and President Barack Obama in 2013 gave you the, let me get this right now, is the medal, Citizens Medal, Presidential Citizens Medal in February of 2013. Tell us about it. How you went to the East Room of the White House. Tell us about that.
That was so powerful. I was this lifetime Republican trying to change within the Republican Party. I studied Obama. I became independent, voted for him, campaigned for him, and then I'm getting this medal, and I get there, and a Native American attorney in the White House said, do you know President Obama? We showed him your video, the black and white video of you winning the gold medal. He told us, if you get down, go watch that video. So he's aware of you. We were not ready for him when he walked in. We're there and he walks in. He stops and says, whoa, Billy. Called me by my first name. Whoa, Billy, you and I have so much in common. We both have beautiful wives and beautiful daughters. So 4 daughters and my wife fell in love with him. And we're there. Megan's the shortest. Our eldest she gave up her spot right next to President Obama. Megan, you come by the president so they can see you in this photo. So she's there and she looks up at President Obama. He said, Megan, what happened? Didn't Billy feed you enough chicken? She says, I've always been the runt. Right afterwards, the media came up and said, did that insult you? I say, listen, President Obama and I, when he said, did I feed Megan enough chicken? We were on the same page. So now we're getting ready to leave. And Patricia said, President Obama, may I have one more hug? He came over like, well, we're in our 80s, like she was his mother. And he hugged her just so gently. So then it started, the daughters, may I have one more? And Lisa, instead of a hug, she says, my 10-year-old son, his whole class wants to know, well, President Obama, do you? She goes, he said, put him up. Boom, 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 boom. So now I'll close with this. To just show you how quick he thinks. He gives me the medals. He leans in to congratulate me. So I took an opportunity, maybe I shouldn't have. And the way he handled it, I said, Mr. President Obama. He kind of looks out at me, and I said, I feel so blessed. I travel the world, 110 countries. I feel so blessed to have you as the leader of the free world today. And there's a silence, 1001, 1002, 1003. Then he lifted his head up and said, Billy, you're still fast. Didn't answer one way or the other. It just chose a perfect, you're still fast. And then we parted. And I felt lonely. I just felt this man was in my life for just a few moments, and he's challenged me in those moments to be a better person. You know?
And you're still fast. I like that. Hey, Billy, I saw you at Standing Rock, and the resistance to the Dakota Access Pipeline, and you were there maybe, a couple times. I know you were there the weekend that the veterans were there, because I saw you there and you and I talked, and I was looking for a picture, and for some reason, one of us were really dark in the picture, so I couldn't use it tonight, but that happens in technology. But tell us about why you went to Standing Rock. Why was that important for you to show up there?
Well, we're so naive in America that there are 3 sets of laws: tribal, state, and federal. To be an attorney, you just have to pass a bar exam in 47 states in state and federal law. So the knowledge of why and that did we have the right, and we're sovereign. We're sovereign under the federal government. We live in a state of quasi-apartheid, taxation without representation. There's just so many things that America does not know, and the tribe had the right to do what they did about stopping the pipeline under the Missouri River that could cause devastating damage with leaks. They had every legal right to do it. I'll do it in this manner. People spoke freely, the freedom in America. Stop them from doing it. We need to know freedom. We can do anything we want. I could commit a crime. If I'm caught, there's a consequence. But it's not one nation under God with freedom for all. We're governed by liberties. I have the freedom to do anything I want as long as I don't interfere with your freedom. That's liberty. You can do whatever you want as long as you don't interfere with the host's freedom. So freedom in America calls for the utmost discipline to work, for us to move to higher ground, to choreograph the horizon of America's future. So I just felt I had to be there in support of the tribe that most America does not know. Other countries are studying our tribal laws. They're studying the treaty rights, and we have no knowledge of them. I feel when President Reagan said, government is not the solution, it's the problem, was the beginning when tribal governments, state governments, federal governments, and the marketplace had to come together to choreograph the horizon of America's future. But instead, we divided. So I went there for many reasons of truth, that the tribe had the right to do that.
Yeah, it was a beautiful thing to see thousands and thousands of people there. I had the occasion to talk with Clyde Belcourt, who was one of the co-founders of the American Indian Movement, and he compared Standing Rock to Wounded Knee of 1973, and he said that any given time in Wounded Knee there were only 200 people there, but at Standing Rock, thousands. And the weekend you and I were there with the veterans, they say 10 to 15,000 people were there, and it was quite the event. And
yeah, and I had so many veterans tell me, these are non-native veterans, that they saw immediately that we pledge to protect this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And veterans, non-native veterans telling me they saw it was a domestic enemy that we were facing, we being the tribal nations. And they felt it was their duty as veterans to protect the tribal nations against the domestic enemy.
Wow. And that is a lot to think about. And Billy, I was in Albuquerque for the Society of the American Indian Dentists, and the American Dental Association paid Native News Online, and me in particular, to interview dentists, because we lack American Indian dentists. There are only, like, I want to say 375, as I recall, and there are 574 tribes, so we don't even have one dentist per tribe. But as I was interviewing a young lady named Dr. Kristen Hasse, she looked at me, she did not know I knew you. She said, Billy Mills changed my life.
Yeah.
Billy Mills saved my life, is actually, I should have said saved. I said, well, tell me about it. She told me about your program. Could you tell us how helpful you were to Dr. Hasse?
Yeah, but first I'll explain Dr. Hasse. She's one of our Dream Starters. Then I'll explain the Dream Starters, where she was going to go to dental school, and she realized how few dentists there were. So she wanted to recruit young Native Americans to dentistry. And she has. She's a dentist now. I told her I'll never call her by her first name. I'll call her Dr. Hasse. Yeah. She laughs and says, Billy, you're not going to do that. Well, she probably has recruited at least 30 people to dentistry, finding the funds for them to go to dental school. She's spun off into other health fields that have to be. But on the 50th anniversary of winning the gold medal, I wanted to empower dreams of Native American youth. People helped empower me, and we decided to give $10,000 grants for 5 years. That'll be 50 grants to young men and women, Native American men and women, who had a dream that could empower their communities. They send in a proposal, they partner with another nonprofit, and we review, we choose 10, we present them with a $10,000 check, they go back and they start working on their dream. This year we're giving $20,000 to each of the Dream Starters. And at the end of 5 years, we pick 5 and give $50,000 grants to give their dream more legs. We have a young man who was, so Dr. Hasse was one of those that got the $50,000 grant. We have a young man, I'll just give you his first name, Noah, paralyzed from the waist down, 15 years old. But he had a dream. He wanted to improve his lifestyle as a disabled person. And he wanted to improve the lifestyle for other Native Americans disabled. He got the $10,000 grant. He was very successful. He got the $50,000 grant. When he's put on his first clinic to try to empower people to a more quality lifestyle that were disabled. He thought maybe 7 or 8 would show up. 150 Native Americans showed up to learn from this 15-year-old boy.
That's incredible.
He now got a full scholarship at the University of Illinois. There's a U.S. National Wheelchair Basketball Championships. He's All-American, and he runs his own nonprofit now, empowering other Native Americans that want to have a more quality lifestyle, that are disabled. Then it just goes on and on and on. People trying to help save the salmon. The dreams have become so diverse. Different themes: social justice, education, health, etc. And this year will be our first year we're giving $20,000 grants. So I told the young people here, if any of them have a dream that could empower their community, find a nonprofit they could partner with. So our Dream Starters are achieving dreams much, much greater than winning a gold medal at the Olympic Games.
Well, Billy, I'm sitting here and thinking how the question I asked you earlier, how do you have staying power or remain relevant all these years? And I understand you've raised, what, over $40 million through your lifetime to help Native Americans. That's fantastic. And let me give you a round of applause. I mean, that's staying power. And just, I'll congratulate you for that. That is just wonderful. One more thing I want to talk about, though, and it's maybe people in the audience don't know this, but Jim Thorpe's gold medals were restored solely to Jim Thorpe earlier this year in June. And I called you at home one Saturday night, and you called me back, or Pat had you call me back, and you told me something that really stuck with me. And can you tell us what your reaction is? And for background, Jim Thorpe's medals were taken back from the Olympic committee back in 1 year after he won them, right? In 1912, was it? So by 1913, the gold medals were taken back. And for many years, decades, literally decades, his family and friends, and they petitioned the Olympic team, International Olympic team or committee to restore those medals. And it had to do with he had played some amateur baseball or something, and so it got real murky. And what a lot of people didn't realize is that Dwight Eisenhower became the president of the United States, had played football against Jim Thorpe when he was at West Point, and Jim Thorpe was at Carlisle, and it just so happened that there was an allegation that the president, well, he wasn't president then, but Eisenhower had taken money when he shouldn't have. And he would never answer that question because he knew the truth. But the medals are restored. Tell me what you felt when you heard the news from Nedra Darling.
I knew Grace Thorpe, I think his oldest daughter, and I always supported the return of the medals. The guy that got second refused to accept them. He said, Jim Thorpe's the gold medalist. And when Nedra called and read the letter from the International Olympic Committee president, I cried. Jim Thorpe was never an Olympic hero of mine. He was an Olympic god. In studying Greek mythology, Zeus was a Greek god and the Olympic gods. So Zeus dwells on Mount Olympus. I say Jim Thorpe, Olympic god. When he chooses, he can dwell there. I was trying to win a gold medal coming from the Black Hills, the heart of everything that is. I flew into Tokyo. I looked out the window, I saw Mount Fuji. It was so powerful. That has to be the heart of everything that is to the Japanese. And I'm trying to climb Mount Olympus to win a gold medal. I won the gold, and all that earned me, which is beautiful to me, I've earned the right to climb Mount Everest, winning one gold medal, having one world record, having one #1 ranking in the world. My second best world ranking was #3. So I can climb Mount Everest and hang out with Seuss, hang out with Jim Thorpe. They dwell there, but I have to hike back down before sunset. So I just felt that one of these days I could leave for the spirit world, I'm going to go dwell on Mount Olympus and meet all these great Olympians. But by Jim having his medals taken away, in my mind, they were keeping him from being this great Olympian. So Jim is back as the 20th century, the greatest athlete. And he's my Olympic god. I have Olympic heroes, but Jim, to me, inspired me so much growing up. The high school where I lived on our reservation was the Thorpes. So every movie I'd go to, I'd go over and read the plaque about Jim Thorpe. And meeting Grace was like meeting a hero, his daughter. But Jim was the Olympic god.
Let me remind you what you told me. You said for the first time you felt like an Olympian.
I'll elaborate on that, and I hope people don't misunderstand me. With Jim Thorpe not having his gold medals, I thought about giving mine back. It was so important to me for people to understand how hard that was. I say that decision was based on systemic racism. The International Olympic Committee left the decision up to the United States Olympic Committee. So gold medals were taken away not by the International Olympic Committee, but by the U.S. Olympic Committee. But it was the International Olympic Committee that overrode them a few months ago and gave the medals back. So I've lived that. I equated that in a much lesser scale when we voted as a team at the University of Kansas to all go to the military barracks when we went to the Texas relays versus splitting the team where the athletes of color go to the military bases and the white athletes go to the hotels. Many times, just when I faced systemic racism, I thought about how difficult Jim Thorpe's challenges were in him facing systemic racism. I tied into my little grandson, Dominic, 10 years old, we're playing golf. High-functioning Asperger's, his vocabulary is, in the 8th grade, was postgraduate level. And he found his gift. So anybody who's high-functioning Asperger's or autism, they find their gift. They're brilliant. So little Dominic's brilliant. He's 10 years old, we're golfing, very dark skin, and they were racial toward him. I come out of the bathroom and they're telling him to go sit down. So I go stand in front of Dominic and the cashier. All of he was wanting to buy a couple extra sauces for his barbecue he bought after he played golf. They wouldn't serve him. I stood in front of Dominic and he said, "Excuse me, Papa." And he looked to the man and said, "I apologize for my grandfather." He looked at me and said, "Papa, I can handle this. You just step aside, please. I can handle this." Then he stood back in front of the guy at the golf course and said, "Can we do business?" "I'm a customer. Can we do business?" The guy said, "Okay, just take the sauce. I'll give it to you." Dominic said, "No, I want to do business. I'll pay for the sauce." So the guy took the change and took the bills and gave Dominic the change, and we used to go sit down with his sauce. And I was so proud of that moment that he was a little boy facing the systemic racism. He knew it, but he said, "I can handle it." and he handled it. So all of that ties into when Jim Thorpe's having his medals taken. Ties into a lady that physically abused in 21 years her husband, beat her once, 18 years in a row. Not in a row, but over 21 years, he beat her once a year, 18 times. And she said she was so broken, it took verges of suicide, etc., and there's just multitudes of counseling to break the cycle and leave him. And she's told me that after that she had earned her PhD. So Jim Thorpe's medals was just not an incident of sport. It fit into a society of people based on archaeological digs. When the Europeans first came, 50 to 90 million people. At the end of the wars, 6 million survived. Other countries are studying the most devastating genocide on the planet occurred in the Americas. So all of that goes into my tears I shed when Jim Thorpe was given back his 2 gold medals.
Well, Jim Thorpe was obviously an inspiration to Native Americans, and Billy Mills, you are truly an inspiration to me, to people in the audience, and to across people who watch us on the streaming. So thank you very much for coming to Western Michigan University, and Chi Miigwech, and you take care of your beautiful wife. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
The stories of of racism was incredibly touching to me. Just the thought that he had to go through all that, especially as a representative of the United States, to be criticized by his race, by the country he's representing, I thought was just horrible.
You know, I'm a track runner myself, and I was going to join cross country. And Billy Mills, you know, he really gave me the motivation, like, you know, shoot for that goal to break his record. And it's very motivational.
Running, you know, found cross country as this outlet, this dream to focus on, and I could just hear so much of his optimism, and that's how he used that as his passion to really put his energy into, and to use that as a vehicle to overcome different barriers and to inspire other people to pursue their dreams.
Well, I didn't know much about Billy Mills. You know, I was pleased that the council decided to bring him here, and I did a little bit of background research on him, and I was fascinated to hear his story. Everything from his upbringing, the boarding school experience, and of course his rise to stardom as an Olympian. I don't think I've sat in a room before with an Olympian, and I could feel his love for the sport, feel his love for Native people, and feel his love for all the things he'd been able to do in his lifetime. So it was great. The other thing I would add is that his story, I think, is very much a hidden story of sorts. I don't think that. There's a reason I didn't know about it. It's because these stories were not told.
We recognize that Western Michigan University is located on the lands of the Ojibwa, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. WMU seeks to acknowledge and honor this ancestral land of the Three Fires Confederacy, the sacred lands of all people, and their continued presence. Thank you.